This is going to be a tutorial on the basics of Blender, and let's just get right into it. So if you go to blender.org and you go to the download page, just download it to whichever software you're using, whether it's Windows or Mac, and just download whichever one suits your computer requirements. And then once you've done that, you should be able to open the software, and the first display you'll see is something that looks like this if you're using Blender 4.0. You might, if you want to get old ones, that's great, they're good, but obviously I'd like to stay up to date as much as possible because they introduce new and improved tools and techniques. But yeah, anyway, let's get right into it. So because we're starting off with a basic idea of Blender, we're not going to open VFX or sculpting or anything like that, all these amazing things that Blender can do. But yeah, we're not going to get into those, so we're going to just open up a new file and click General, so we have all the options to do other stuff in the future if we would like. Let's just go over the basics of how you can navigate the scene and move the camera and all that good stuff. So when you start a new scene, you begin with a cube, a camera and a single light source, and this is what it all looks like. And you can go into different viewport modes. You can go line view or wireframe view, basic solid view, then shading view to give you the idea of what the image textures look like. Then you can go to rendered view, which the lighting effect on the scene. So this one light casts shadow here and lights up this side, the cube here. It gives you the most accurate view possible. But yeah, anyway, to navigate and move throughout the scene, what you want to do, what I was just doing then, is holding the scroll wheel on my mouse and just moving the mouse around to navigate around the scene, to drone, almost like a drone shot around the object. And you can hold shift and then hold mouse scroll wheel, and then that allows you to pan around the scene just like that. You can zoom in with the scroll wheel, just like this, if you want to get closer to your subject. Now let's talk about this camera here. So for currently what we're seeing is the viewport display, and if you want to access what the rendered camera will see, we have to make sure that it's selected and highlighted. So if I click Shift D to duplicate this camera and then move it along using this tool, we'll get into that in a second. So now I have two cameras. This one is highlighted, therefore when I press this camera, toggle camera view, I will enter this camera up top here, but if I tap this icon, I will go to the second camera view, so I can access multiple cameras however I please. But yeah, if you want to press X to delete that camera, because we don't need it at the moment, we only need one camera for this project. And yeah, that's how you use the camera. And if you want to go back to camera view and you want to move the camera from our point of view, if you go to camera to view, and once we're in camera, we can move our camera depending on our mouse toggles, and yeah, basically we can move the camera to our display however we please. Or you can come out of the camera, deselect camera view so you don't navigate it, and you can just select it and move it using that tool. But yeah, let's go into details of these tools. So what they do is this will move it in three-dimensional space on the X, Y and Z, Y axis and the Z axis, and then this will also navigate it on that'll be the Y-axis, but using the X-axis as like a wall barrier, so it won't go beyond that. Let's rotate it by selecting the rotate tool, and we can bring it up, down, we can rotate it to have a Dutch angle on our camera, and then we can scale it using this tool. So we can make this camera like, we can make everything like a macro size if we increase the size of the camera. But anyway, let's go to Object, and we will reset all these settings by resetting the scale to 1, all the rotations to 0. And how I did that is I held my mouse over one of the boxes and left click, held it, and then raised it up and selected all the above. And now I can adjust all these to whatever number I like, or I can just go through them one by one and go 0, 0, 0. But what I want to do is I want to rotate this on the X-axis, I believe, which is this one. So let's bring this up to 90 degrees again, so it's facing the subject. And then this we can keep there because we'll change the location after the fact. But yeah, that's all those tools over there. So now let's talk about the primitives that you can use in Blender. So what we start off initially is a cube, which you can see here, which I mentioned at the start, but we can add in a sphere if we wanted to. So let's just raise it up out of the cube, and we've got a sphere here. So we can use that if you want to model a ball, or if you want to start our sculpt off with a ball and try and stretch it out from there and make it more into a face. A good primitive to start off with would be a sphere, but let's press X to delete that and then tap delete. What we're going to be using for this tutorial to make a pencil is we're going to be using a cylinder, but we'll get into that later. But yeah, same as with the camera that I demonstrated before, you can tap on an object and you can move it X, Y, and Z axis just like that, and then Command Z to go back a space to track back to what you previously did, similar with most softwares. If you ever want to add a mesh in, it's just up here, add, and then choose one of these. You can also add a curve, which will be used for other stuff, which I won't get into in this tutorial. But yeah, that's all the stuff you need to know for that. Now let's go to edit mode. So if you have an object selected and you go to edit mode, you can adjust vertex, the edge, and the faces of an object. So what we can do here is we can lift up this point and raise it to something like that, which would be an odd shape to do. It kind of would mess with your textures because of this weird angle here. This isn't really a flat face, and textures often prefer flat faces or as flat as possible. But yeah, let's go Command Z to move that back, and we could use this and select an edge and can raise that to make a sort of declining roof, angled roof for this building. It could be if you wanted to make that, and then if you go Command Z, go face, and we can just raise up the text, raise up the face of this cube up like this to make a building or a skyscraper. But yeah, very useful editing mode. We can also do it with the scaling tool. We can scale this face if you want to make it larger, to make it look like that, whatever that is, maybe a container, maybe a pyramid if you want to go like that. But yeah, we can rotate it as well, just like that, to make an interesting shape. But yeah, very useful tools that are versatile. If you want to extrude an edge, we can do that. So we can have separate geometry, so we can select that face and extend it out here by using this tool. Very handy. It adds geometry, so keep that in mind. Then we have the inset faces, so we can make it a bit smaller here, then go back to extrude and extend it like this to make it all. If we tap this, it goes in a straight line, but if you tap the outer circle, it will go whichever angle you want it to. But yeah, we can make a building just like that, easy peasy with certain tiers. And then we can bevel the edges, which we'll be doing for our pencil. So we can just stretch out of that and it bevels the edge. One thing I should mention is if we want to go to object mode and we stretch this object, so let's go over to the transform panel. If we want to stretch this object like that, that's brilliant. But now it's recognized as these angles, so when we go back and bevel our edges here, it will be more lengthened. It will stretch the bevel like this, which you may want, which will be which can work in instances if you want a particularly steep bevel. But what we could do is you can go back, and with that stretch we can go Control A and reset scale, well, apply scale, and now all these are back to 1 meter. And now when we bevel the edge up here, it will be not so stretched. It will behave as if it's just a 90-degree angle rather than a stretched angle. But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind for projects. But let's go Command Z all the way back to there. Brilliant. So let's talk about these panels over here, and we were in object mode at the moment, which means we can rotate and move location of this object and scale it if you want to. But let's go to the render engine properties and the settings. So at the moment we're in the render engine Eevee, which is considered a game engine because it's real time, well, reasonably real time. It may take like 3 or 5 seconds for it to render out the lighting, depending on how many lights you have, how big your scene is, if you have glass, if you have volumes. It all depends on multiple factors, but for the most part it is considered a real-time game engine. But what we'll be using for our final render is Cycles, which is a ray tracing render engine, which actually sends beam of lights out of the camera. Well, beams of light, it sends out information out of the camera and eventually finds the lights and ray traces that path of light to get accurate shadows and reflections. Not the best description, but that's basically what it does, is that it accurately depicts shadows, reflections, bounce light and all that, as accurate as a machine can do. Pleasing on the eye, it's so realistic if you want to go for realistic renders, which we are going to be trying to achieve in this tutorial. Also, just to mention, when we use Cycles, it automatically sets it as CPU, but we want to set it to GPU. So it's not only much quicker, but it's less strain on your computer, because the GPU, I believe, can do a lot more operations than your CPU, or at least for a standard GPU and CPU. But what you want to make sure is selected. Let's just go off shade mode because it's less strain on my computer. Let's go to Edit, Preferences, and make sure that your Cycles render device is using a GPU within your computer. So if you have Intel or NVIDIA, which I think are the same thing, select CUDA or Optics. Optics, I believe, is a newer version. It has more, it's more accelerated and has more capability. Probably just better in general, but I'm using a Radeon AMD, so I have to go with HIP. So yeah, that's what I've selected, and that's the graphic cards I selected. But yeah, make sure that's been selected so it actually knows what device to use on your computer. But yeah, that's just for when we're using Cycles. But anyway, let's come back off that and go to Eevee. So what we can do to make Eevee a bit more appealing for when we're actually making stuff within Blender, we can turn on ambient occlusion. You can turn on screen space reflections. So ambient occlusion means when objects come close to one another, you see the light being affected, they cast more shadow. Yeah, that's pretty much what that does. And then screen space reflections just means that there's better reflections in our reflective materials, and yeah, very helpful. And then for shadows, we can increase this if we want to. We can double it, but 512 is good enough. We're not actually going to render an Eevee anyway, so we just need to select those for now, and that will make this look a lot better. I'll just demonstrate an example by going Shift-D to duplicate my cube. Another tip is you can also go Alt-D, but that does an identical copy, which saves on render time, but at the cost that you can't tweak it as much. You can't edit, you can't use edit mode as without affecting everything that's had a Shift-D duplication. An Alt-D duplicate. So an Alt-D is a more accurate, a specific duplication, so they are identical. And Shift-D is just you're just making another object. You're duplicating it, and now it's a separate object that you can edit however you please. But it does take up more render time. So Alt-D is great if you want to have a forest, a bunch of trees that are identical, and you just rotate them a little bit so they look a little bit different. It'll take up less render time. And then Shift-D is if you want to have a cube, but you want to make the house, you have a house, but then you want to Shift-D duplicate it and tweak a few things. But yeah, that's just an overstated description. But anyway, let's just show you what ambient occlusion does with this cube. So what we'll do is we'll shrink it down by using the scale tool, and let's just bring it close to the other cube, and what you can see is this slight shadow effect, and that is what ambient occlusion does. It gives us a more understanding of how close objects are getting, so it's a clearer way to see that effect of objects coming closer together. But yeah, anyway, select that just so you can see that effect. Looks more realistic. But yeah, XD to get rid of it. And yeah, before we finish this tutorial, I just want to talk about this collection up here. What we can do is we can make a new collection. This current collection holds our camera, light and cube, so that will be like our main scene. But then what I recommend when starting a project, or when like you're in the midst of a project, is that you have a backup collection, so you can duplicate your projects and you can duplicate like prior iterations of a project and just throw it in there and then hide it using this hide from viewport and hide from render. So this allows you to hide an object or a camera or anything in your viewport and in your final render, so you can have it in your scene, but it just won't be viewed at the moment until you until you select it back into view. But what you can do is you can hide a whole collection, so you can have this collection filled with objects of backups and iterations. So like another cube, for example, let's go Shift D and let's move it to the side. This is a technique that I like to use, and then we can just hold left click and then bring it into the backup folder and then just hide it. So now we have that backup, but it's invisible, so we don't need to worry about it. And if you want to ever bring it back, we just bring that back and then we have it there, and we can bring it back into our main collection. But yeah, anyway, delete that X, and I'll keep that collection there just as a good practice for working on projects in Blender. And finally, probably the most important bit of information I could give you this whole lesson is to make sure you file, save as, and save your Blender folder to a designated location with a designated folder with a clear naming system. And just name it something like pencil tutorial. You could name it pencil, I'm just doing a tutorial because this is a tutorial, but yeah, save as. And now we should, in theory, saved there. So I've put a few more things in this folder, but yeah, this is the Blender file that we are currently using. So yeah, make sure you save it, because like a lot of softwares, Blender can have its moment where it will crash if you like do something that it just can't handle, like duplicate something a million times. But anyway, really good practice, so yeah, keep that in mind. And I believe that is the end of this tutorial. Yeah, I will see you in the second episode where we actually begin modelling a pencil. So yeah, I'll see you in the next video.